In the spring of 1950, somewhere along the muddy banks of the Savannah River, deep in the cypress-draped swamplands straddling South Carolina and Georgia, the United States government made a decision so monumental and so secret that it would displace thousands of families, consume an area larger than the city of Chicago, and produce enough plutonium to end human civilization several times over. The families who lived in the quiet towns of Ellenton and Dunbarton had no idea what was coming. Farmers tending their fields, children walking to school, churches that had stood for over a century. All of it would vanish within 18 months, not from bombs, not from floods, but from a government order so classified that most of the workers carrying it out didn't even know what they were truly building. For over 70 years, the full scope of what happened in those South Carolina swamps was buried beneath layers of federal classification, institutional denial, and the quiet erasure of an entire chapter of American history. But in early 2026, a tranche of declassified Department of Energy documents, some marked eyes only for over 4 decades, revealed details about the Savannah River plant that had never been made public. Details about what was produced there, what was buried there, and what, according to those documents, may still be happening there today. This is the story of America's most dangerous secret factory, hidden not in a mountain, not beneath a desert, but in a swamp in the American South, right beneath the feet of people who never knew it existed. To understand why the United States government decided to build one of the most hazardous industrial complexes in human history in the middle of a populated southern landscape, you have to go back to 1949. On August 29th of that year, the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb, codenamed First Lightning by American intelligence. The shockwave that traveled from Kazakhstan to Washington, D.C. was not made of air pressure. It was made of pure, paralyzing terror. The American monopoly on nuclear weapons, the cornerstone of post-war Western security, had collapsed in a single afternoon. President Truman's advisors were unanimous. The United States needed to massively expand its nuclear arsenal, and it needed to do it immediately. That meant one thing above all else: plutonium. And plutonium required reactors, lots of them. The Atomic Energy Commission commissioned a search for the ideal site within weeks of the Soviet test. The criteria were almost impossible to satisfy simultaneously. The facility needed to be far enough from major population centers to be defensible and secret, but close enough to infrastructure to support a workforce of tens of thousands. It needed a vast and reliable water source. Nuclear reactors consume water in staggering quantities. It needed geological stability, a favorable climate, and enough flat, open land to construct what would effectively become a self-contained industrial city. When the survey teams arrived at the swampy pine forests along the Savannah River in South Carolina, they knew almost immediately that they had found their answer. What followed was one of the largest and most rapid construction projects in American peacetime history. The government invoked eminent domain across roughly 310 square miles, an area of land so vast that the entire island of Manhattan could fit inside it 6 times over. Approximately 6,000 families received notices. The towns of Ellenton and Dunbarton, communities with roots stretching back to before the Civil War, were given a matter of months to pack up and disappear. Headstones were exhumed from cemeteries and relocated. Churches were physically moved on flatbed trucks. And then the land was sealed. Armed federal agents established perimeters. Barbed wire went up along roads that had once been open to anyone. By 1951, the DuPont Corporation, the same company that had built the Hanford plutonium reactors for the Manhattan Project, had been secretly contracted to construct and operate what would become known internally as the Savannah River plant. A budget of over $1.4 billion was authorized. Adjusted for inflation, that figure exceeds $12 billion today, and almost none of it appeared in any public government ledger. The construction itself was a masterwork of deliberate invisibility. DuPont brought in over 38,000 workers at peak activity, a workforce larger than many American cities at the time. They were hired in waves from different states through different contracting firms, each group told only what they needed to know about their specific task. A welder from Alabama might spend 6 months welding pipes without ever being told what those pipes would carry. An electrician from Ohio might wire an entire building and never learn what machinery would eventually hum inside it. The compartmentalization was so extreme that workers arriving at the site were issued color-coded badges that determined which zones of the facility they were permitted to enter. Cross a line into a zone your badge didn't authorize, and armed guards would intercept you within minutes. The cover story given to the surrounding public was almost laughably vague. Official communications described a government manufacturing facility of unspecified purpose. Local newspapers, under informal federal pressure, declined to investigate further. The workers who commuted from nearby Aiken and Augusta were instructed not to discuss their employment with family members. Many of them complied, not because they were coerced, but because the culture of Cold War secrecy had permeated deeply enough that ordinary people genuinely believed that silence might be the difference between safety and annihilation. The roads leading to the plant were unmarked on public maps, and yet the plant itself was hiding in plain sight. The cooling towers, when they eventually rose above the tree line, were visible for miles. The glow of industrial lighting turned the night sky orange above the swamp. Everyone within 40 miles knew something enormous was being built. They simply didn't know what. Life inside the facility, once operational in 1953, was unlike anything most of its workers had ever experienced. The plant was effectively a small city, with its own medical facilities, its own fire department, its own security apparatus, and its own internal culture shaped entirely by the nature of the work being done there. 5 heavy-water nuclear reactors, designated R, P, L, K, and C, sat at the heart of the complex, each one a cathedral of concrete and steel designed to bombard uranium and lithium targets with neutrons, transmuting them into plutonium and tritium, the twin engines of thermonuclear weapons. The reactors were housed in buildings so massive that the humidity of the South Carolina summer created their own internal weather systems. Workers sometimes reported mist drifting along the upper catwalks on cool mornings. Health and safety standards at the plant were, by any modern measure, catastrophically inadequate. Workers handling irradiated materials were given dosimeters to monitor their radiation exposure, but internal documents, including several contained in the 2026 declassified release, suggest that dose records were routinely adjusted downward when workers approached limits that would have required their removal from duty. The plant needed warm bodies near the reactors, and the pressure to maintain production schedules frequently overrode caution. There were no public disclosures. Workers who complained were reassigned. Workers who became visibly ill were quietly separated from employment and offered modest settlements with confidentiality clauses that wouldn't look out of place in a corporate severance agreement. But there was a problem. The production process generated waste, enormous nightmarish quantities of it. High-level radioactive waste, liquid and intensely lethal, accumulated in underground storage tanks almost from the moment the plant began operating. The plan, such as it was, involved storing this material in double-walled carbon steel tanks buried beneath the soil of the facility, while engineers developed a long-term solution. That solution has never fully arrived. Decades passed, the waste kept accumulating. The tanks, never designed for permanent storage, began to corrode. What they discovered next was even more disturbing. By the late 1980s, internal surveys confirmed that at least a portion of those tanks had already leaked, releasing high-level radioactive material into the soil and groundwater of the Savannah River watershed, a river that flows through multiple states and supplies drinking water to millions of people. Records tell a different story than the one the Department of Energy presented publicly during those years. While official briefings described the situation as under control and being monitored, the classified assessments painted a far grimmer picture. Contamination plumes had migrated further than modeled. Certain isotopes, cesium, strontium, tritium, had been detected in the river itself, and rather than triggering emergency public notifications, these findings were classified. The surrounding communities, predominantly black and working-class towns downstream from the facility, were never told. The fishing continued, the well water was drawn, and the documents stayed locked away. The cover-up extended beyond the waste problem. The plant's full production figures, the precise quantities of plutonium and tritium manufactured, remained classified long after the Cold War ended. This was not merely bureaucratic habit, it was a deliberate strategy. If the public knew exactly how much weapons-grade material had been produced at Savannah River, they could calculate, with uncomfortable precision, how large the American nuclear stockpile truly was. They might also begin to ask questions about the waste. If X tons of plutonium were produced and Y tons of waste were generated per ton of product, then how much radioactive material is currently sitting beneath the South Carolina swamp? The arithmetic was something the government was deeply reluctant to have performed by anyone outside a classified setting. The end of the Cold War did not bring clarity. When the plant's 5 reactors were shut down between 1988 and 1992, the official narrative was one of responsible transition, a dangerous chapter closed, a new era of cleanup and remediation begun. The Savannah River site, as it was now renamed, was recast as an environmental stewardship facility, a place where the sins of the nuclear age would be slowly, methodically undone, and in certain respects, that work genuinely began. The Defense Nuclear Facilities Safety Board was established, cleanup contracts were awarded, a visitors center was open, offering carefully curated tours to school groups and journalists. The rusting pipes and glowing reactors of the Cold War were wrapped in a narrative of responsible management. But the tanks remain. As of the declassified 2026 documents, approximately 37 million gallons of high-level radioactive waste still sits in aging underground storage at the Savannah River site, much of it in tanks that have already exceeded their designed operational lifetimes. A vitrification facility, designed to convert this liquid waste into stable glass logs for permanent storage, has been under construction for decades and remains years from completion. Workers at the site have, in recent years, reported unexplained failures of monitoring equipment in certain tank farm areas. In 2023, a local environmental group filed a Freedom of Information Act request for groundwater monitoring data from the southeastern quadrant of the facility. The response they received contained 847 pages. Of those, 612 were fully redacted. The remaining 235 were so heavily blacked out that they yielded fewer than 40 readable sentences. There are people who live near the Savannah River site today, residents of Aiken County, of communities on the Georgia side of the river, who have noticed things they struggle to explain. Trucks moving through the facility's outer perimeter roads at 3 in the morning, running without visible cargo markings. Sections of the old reactor buildings that appear, from satellite imagery, to have been recently accessed, disturbed gravel, fresh tire tracks, scaffolding that wasn't there 18 months prior. A local historian who has spent 15 years documenting the oral histories of families displaced from Ellington and Dunbarton described in a 2024 interview receiving an informal visit from 2 men identifying themselves as federal contractors, asking which archival documents she had gathered and whether any of them were technical in nature. She said they were polite. She also said she had never felt more frightened in her adult life. The descendants of those displaced families, the people whose grandparents were handed government notices and told to leave communities their families had built over generations, are still asking for answers that haven't fully come. They want to know what is in the soil beneath where Ellington once stood. They want to know whether the cancer rates in surrounding counties, rates that independent researchers have noted are statistically elevated, have any relationship to decades of radioactive contamination in the watershed. They want to know why, in 2026, documents about a facility that supposedly ceased weapons production over 30 years ago are still being released with redactions so aggressive that they render the pages nearly unreadable. What happened in the South Carolina swamps was not an accident of history. It was a choice, a series of choices made by powerful people operating in total secrecy, with no accountability to the communities they placed in harm's way. 5 reactors built in a swamp. Millions of gallons of radioactive waste buried beneath American soil. Families erased from maps they had called home for a century. a river that millions drink from, running past a site where the full scope of contamination has never been disclosed to the public. The Savannah River site is still there. The waste is still there. The trucks still move through the gates in the early hours of the morning, unremarked and unrecorded. And the documents that might tell us the full truth are still line by line, page by page, blacked out by a government that has never fully decided that the public deserves to know what was done in their name. We know about the Savannah River site because enough people pushed hard enough, long enough, to force partial disclosure. The question that should keep you awake is a simple one. How many facilities like it are there? Facilities we haven't yet found. Towns that were erased from maps we've never thought to question. Waste buried beneath ground that no one has yet thought to test. They told us about Savannah River. Eventually. Partially. Reluctantly. What they haven't told us about is something else entirely. If stories like this one, buried secrets, hidden facilities, the classified machinery of the nuclear age, are what you come here for, subscribe now. The next one goes even deeper.